Before laws came steel, before kings came fear, this is not a world of justice. Here walks Conan. In the gilded halls of Aquilonia, where perfumed nobles sipped wine from golden chalices and debated philosophy with words as empty as their courage, Conan the Cimmerian sat upon a throne he had won with steel and cunning. He was king now, this barbarian from the frozen north, and the courtiers whispered behind jeweled fans about the savage who ruled them. They spoke of civilization as if it were a treasure hard won, a bulwark against the darkness, a light that separated man from beast. But Conan knew better. He had seen civilization for what it truly was, a lie men told themselves to forget the blood beneath their fingernails. He had not always been king. There were years, brutal and bloody years, when he had wandered the kingdoms of the world as thief and mercenary, pirate and warrior. He had walked streets paved with marble and streets thick with filth. He had seen the great cities of Stygia and Zamora, the spired towers of Koth, and the pleasure palaces of Turan. Everywhere he went, civilized men spoke of their superiority over the barbarian tribes, of law and order, of culture and refinement. And everywhere he went, Conan saw the truth beneath the painted surface. Civilization was simply barbarism wearing a mask. The merchant who smiled and offered fair prices would slit your throat for a handful of coins if he thought he could escape consequences. The noble who spoke of honor and chivalry would poison his rival and bed the man's widow before the corpse grew cold. The priest who preached mercy and compassion grew fat on tithes wrung from starving peasants. They called it commerce, politics, religion, gave it pretty names to disguise the fundamental savagery that drove all human action. In Cimmeria, men were honest about their nature. When a Cimmerian wanted something another man possessed, he challenged him for it, sword to sword, strength against strength. The victor took the prize. The vanquished went to whatever gods or oblivion awaited beyond death's threshold. There was no pretense, no elaborate justification, no appeals to higher principles. It was pure and brutal and true. But civilized men could not bear such honesty. They needed their laws, their codes, their elaborate systems of custom and tradition. Not because these things made them better, but because these things allowed them to commit the same acts of violence and theft while maintaining the fiction that they were superior to barbarians. A Hyborian king who sent armies to conquer his neighbors' lands called it expansion, manifest destiny, the spreading of enlightenment. A Cimmerian raider who took what he wanted by force called it raiding. The action was identical, only the words differed. Conan had learned this lesson in blood across a dozen kingdoms. In Shadizar, he had watched judges condemn thieves to death while taking bribes from richer criminals. In Masantia, he had seen merchants grow wealthy on the slave trade while attending temple services and praying for their immortal souls. In Agrapur, he had observed nobles who spoke eloquently of beauty and art, while their dungeons echoed with the screams of those who had displeased them. The lie went deeper still. Civilized men spoke of progress, of humanity advancing from its savage origins toward some greater destiny. They pointed to their cities, their roads, their aqueducts and libraries as proof of this advancement. But Conan had fought in enough wars to know that the so-called advancement was an illusion. Civilized armies slaughtered with the same enthusiasm as barbarian hordes. They simply did so with better organization and called it strategy. He had seen cities fall, watched as the veneer of civilization cracked and fell away when walls were breached and enemies poured through the streets. In those moments of crisis, the civilized became indistinguishable from the savage. They raped and murdered and stole with abandon, all the pretty words forgotten in the primal urge to survive, to dominate, to take. The philosopher became looter, the merchant became murderer, the noble became no different from the beggar he had once scorned. This was the truth that civilized men could not acknowledge. Their civilization was not a transformation of human nature, but merely a suppression of it, a thin crust of custom and law laid over the molten core of primal instinct. And that crust was fragile. It took very little to crack it, to release what had always churned beneath. Conan had also observed how civilization bred weakness. In the harsh lands of Cimmeria, the weak died young. Winter claimed them, or hunger. or the swords of enemies. Only the strong survived, and their strength was passed to their children. This was natural selection in its purest form, the cosmos sorting the wheat from the chaff. But civilization protected the weak, allowed them to survive and breed. The sickly merchant who would have frozen to death in a Cimmerian winter grew wealthy in a Hyborian city and sired a dozen children. The cowardly noble who would have fallen in his first battle inherited his father's title and lived to old age, his line continuing. Over generations, this protection of weakness weakened the entire race. Civilized men grew soft in their comfortable houses, their bodies going to fat, their muscles slackening from disuse. They hired others to fight their battles, to work their fields, to do anything that required actual strength or courage. Then they had the audacity to call this progress, to claim that the ability to pay someone else to do your killing for you represented some advancement of the human spirit. The barbarian knew better. Strength was the ultimate virtue, the only quality that mattered when all the pretenses were stripped away. A strong man could survive anywhere, could adapt to any circumstance, but a weak man, no matter how educated or refined, would perish the moment his civilization failed to protect him. And civilizations always failed. Conan had seen the ruins that littered the world, the crumbled remains of empires that had thought themselves eternal. Acheron had fallen, mighty Valusia was dust, even Atlantis had been swallowed by the sea. The pyramids of Stygia were already ancient when the current dynasties arose, built by peoples whose very names had been forgotten. Every civilization believed itself the pinnacle of human achievement, the final flowering of progress. Every civilization was wrong. They fell because they were built on lies, on the false premise that man could transcend his nature through laws and customs. They fell because they grew decadent, mistaking comfort for strength, peace for security. They fell because they forgot the fundamental truth that the universe was hostile, that survival was never guaranteed, that only the strong and vigilant could endure. The priests spoke of divine judgment, claiming civilizations fell because they had sinned against the gods. The philosophers spoke of cycles, of natural processes of rise and decline. But Conan knew the simpler truth. Civilizations fell because the men within them grew weak, and weakness was always punished. The cosmos had no mercy, no forgiveness. It tested every creature, every society, every race. Those that failed the test were swept away. He had tried to explain this once to a Nemedian scholar, a man who had written great tomes on ethics and governance. The scholar had been horrified, calling Conan's worldview brutal and nihilistic. But the barbarian king had merely laughed. Brutal, yes, the truth often was. But nihilistic, no. For there was meaning in the struggle, purpose in the testing. Every man who faced the world honestly, who fought with his own strength and lived by his own will, was worth 1,000 philosophers who hid behind pretty words. The scholar had asked what, then, separated man from beast, if not civilization. Conan's answer had been simple: nothing. Man was beast, beast with the ability to speak and reason, but beast nonetheless. The same drives that sent wolves hunting through the forest sent men conquering across the world. The same instincts that made male stags battle for dominance made kings war for thrones. To pretend otherwise was to indulge in fantasy, but there was nobility in accepting this truth, in living according to one's nature without shame or pretense. The Cimmerian who raided his neighbor's lands did not pretend he did so for any higher reason than his own enrichment. The warrior who killed did not claim divine sanction or moral superiority. He killed because that was what warriors did, because strength demanded to be tested and proven. Sitting upon his throne, having clawed his way from barbarian mercenary to king of the mightiest nation in the world, Conan understood that he had not become civilized. He had simply learned to play by civilization's rules when it suited him, to use their own systems against them. But beneath the crown and the purple robes, he remained what he had always been: a barbarian, a killer, a survivor. And when Aquilonia fell, as all nations must eventually fall, when the walls crumbled and the libraries burned, and the philosophers fled screaming through the streets, what would remain? Not civilization with its laws and customs, not culture with its art and literature. Only the strong would remain, those who could survive without the protection of society's comforting lies. This was why civilization was a lie. Not because it claimed to offer order and peace, but because it claimed these things were natural, sustainable, permanent. They were not. They were aberrations, brief moments of imposed structure in a cosmos that tended always toward chaos. Enjoy them while they lasted, certainly. Use them to your advantage when possible, but never ever forget what lurked beneath. The beast, the savage, the truth of fang and claw and the will to survive. That was eternal. That was real. Everything else was shadow and smoke, destined to fade when the winds of time blew strong enough. And the winds always blew, eventually. Always.